African people, African people, let's build. My name is Yves Darbouze, and this is the Pan-African product. Today, we are going to have a nice little discussion. We're gonna go through some of the things that I went through when I started deciding how the economics of Africa could work. Because if you go into it without bias, right? You go into that thing without bias. You start to understand that this system is designed, the system that we participate in, this international global system of economics, it's smoke and mirrors. And the more honest you start to look at it, the more realistic you start to become, you start to understand that the promotion of these things, right? The capitalism versus socialism argument. You could barely have that argument because America is not to be clear, the United States of America. My South American brothers love to remind me we are Americans too. Not in the way they think about it. But nonetheless, today we want to do a analysis, right? The analysis that I did when I started designing what I call Ubuntu economics. Ubuntu economics is not really designed by me. That would be a lie. Product managers don't prestidigitate or make it appear from magic. What we do, a lot of times the product exists. A lot of times the features are what are being worked on, the feature of that software product. And it's not a thought of good and evil. It's not a thought of wrong and right. It's business. And I applied the same, and not to say that that's good or bad or indifferent. I applied the same mental application or the same process when trying to think of capitalism versus socialism. I like to say, and I'll admit this out front, that I'm a pragmatic Marxist. I understand this thing that is capitalism can't go on like this. But really doing the research for this book, Leave, Operationalizing a Pan-African State, that the analysis I do in the book is much deeper than any analysis that I do for YouTube. I want you to get interested. I want you to people. My mother was saying to me the other day, not people, my mom, "Oh, you're giving the book away." Yes, that's exactly what I'm doing. This is a political movement. This is something that I want to be out there for free. When you buy this book, you're paying for 551 pages, which is the max for self-publishers, right? So I've done this analysis before, and this was 2023, 2024 in the book. The analysis has gotten worse. Matter of fact, there's a lot of prophecy in here. Gotta plug it. Oh, there's a lot of prophecy in here. There's a lot of stuff that I talk about in here that is happening right now, that was predicted to happen right now. And this thing has only one of two places to go. Capitalism, you first must understand, is individualistic. It's dog eat dog. It's competition. It's the free market. You know, they believe in, let's list all the capitalists believe. They believe in competition, right? Or what they call the free market. Let's remember this. Capitalism is individualistic. They believe in competition, right? Meaning the free market. The free market for them is like the Holy Spirit. The free market for them is like not Christ. Christ are their messiahs is Donald Trump. If he's not the messiah, Donald Trump is the pope of capitalism. Everything that capitalism is. Greedy, bloated, lying. He is Donald Trump is capitalism made flesh. It's just the truth. Donald Trump is a human being that was born with $600 million. Like his father, here you go. Not only was he born with $600 million, but he had the relationships in real estate that his father had. Then he went to the USFL, right, to create competition with the NFL. He owned the New Jersey Generals. He became the most outspoken and powerful owner amongst the USF owners, and he destroyed the league. Google it. He completely ruined the league. Then he, not then, but kind of at the same time, he tries to take over Atlantic City. And if you are a businessman that loses money at casinos with every advantage in the world, if you still lose money, then what are you? Who are you? If you can't make money out of a casino, you're not a clever businessman. And when his income tax records came out, he had years in the negative. I no shade, I have years in the negative. My CPA is very good. My CPA is great. My accountant is great at this taxes thing. Very great. And we follow every single law. But this law was built from money. It was built for the religion of capitalism, right? And socialism, right? I don't necessarily want to define socialism in the same way. Because the components of socialism, which is supposed to be group economics, let me fix that. Group economics, right? Because the reason why I don't want to define socialism, because socialism is a little different from capitalism, where socialism is linear and there's one form of socialism capitalism is linear and there's one form of capitalism for all of it, right? The capitalism of Nazi Germany is the same capitalism of the United States, is the same capitalism of Imperial United Kingdom, the same capitalism in India. They don't have different names, it's just capitalism, right? But under socialism, you'll have communism as an example. You'll have all different forms of socialism. There's the new one, democratic socialism. I feel like democratic socialism is putting the neoliberalism into socialism, right? But underneath this umbrella, you have all kinds of socialism. You have the Trotskys, you have the communism, you have democratic socialism. Right? So socialism is a little different from capitalism. Capitalism is linear. All of this flows into that one silo, right? There's no responsible capitalism. There's no capitalism. There's capitalism is that type of religion. It doesn't allow for any gods before them. Even Christianity, even the Bible does not usurp, what you see in that form of evangelism. What is it called again? Prosperity evangelism, right? All of it flows through here. So in my business, the way we tend to kind of discern or study something is through case studies, right? And the socialist case studies is weird. Right? The case studies should be Venezuela. The case studies should be, Venezuela, Cuba, China. Russia still has a form of, even though I would say the current version of Russia, especially after its fall, was a very capitalist version of Russian economics. And people became billionaires. It started looking a lot like America. Sometimes the best things that happen is when another country forces your hand. And they started to use a lot of their socialist background to fund a military-industrial complex that has, even because they had to fight this war with Ukraine, has even become more, what's the word I'm looking for? Has become more socialist than capitalist in this time, and which most nations do. They start to tell you, What are you going to do for your country? Are you going to, collect all the recyclables, collect all the rubber and iron and bring it to the places so that we could make battleships? Yeah, that, believe it or not, that's socialism. That's socialism. But we won't talk about it. But so back to the case studies. The case studies are important. That's how we discern, is through case studies. So Venezuela is a case study on socialism. Cuba is a case study on socialism. China, Russia, case studies on socialism. And they will tell you, the capitalists, that everywhere that socialism is performed, it fails. Socialism always fails, is the story they tell us. And we believe that shit. We repeat that shit in arguments. You know how many times I've been in the spaces and I'm talking to someone, and I'm never in the spaces preaching socialism. You want to know something very truthful? I'm a capitalist. I'm more capitalist than any of y'all. Have any of y'all ever had 35 employees and had to make payroll every 2 weeks? Have any of y'all ever had your investors having to meet with them and make numbers? And no, I'm a capitalist. I get money. This isn't a brag. This is me explaining how I've adapted to living in this place. And I believed all the stuff. And I grew up looking up to all the guys. I grew up looking up to Russell Simmons. I grew up looking up to Diddy. A lot of you would lie and say that Sean Combs, which I think he'll go by going forward, that Sean Combs was a great businessman that we looked up to. All right, I looked up to Robert Johnson. These are the guys I wanted to be like, but in tech. I wanted to be the Russell Simmons of social networks. That's where my mind was at. I am a capitalist, right? A reformed capitalist, because I understand the underlying principle that greed is not good. No matter how many times Michael Douglas says it, no matter how many sequels come out about that movie Wall Street, greed as your central guiding principle can only lead to death, war, and hate. It has to. It'll make hate where hate doesn't exist. Why do so many Americans supposedly hate Maduro? I bring him up because he's in the news right now, not him specifically, but why do we hate him? What do we know about him? What proof have you seen besides talking heads? Yeah, he's a dictator. Yeah, he's killing his people. Yeah, there's civil rights. Amnesty International says it. The puppet that we're trying to put in just won the Nobel Peace Prize. Capitalism is a corrupting force, and I know that through its case studies. Let's take a few for example, right? The case studies that we have are examples of how capitalism has been executed. It's a story that we kind of understand, but we don't. We know these stories, but even when we know these stories, we don't properly apply them to capitalism, right? So let's take something like sugar and the sugar industry. Recently, a study came out, maybe in the last 5 years, a study came out that shows that the sugar industry paid scientists to not inform the American people on how sugar is causing health problems. We just poured it on our cornflakes, filled it in our coffee cups, drank it in our sodas, right? And not only did the sugar industry have something to lose, the corn industry, which is highly subsidized by the American government. The corn industry is why when we drink sodas in America, they have high fructose corn syrup in it, probably even more deadly as a sugar than actual bleached white sugar. And we told and lied to Americans for 30 years. We told them to eat more bread and wheat and the stuff that grows in North America. And they came up with a food pyramid. And that food pyramid was supposed to instruct us on how to eat healthy. And while scientists and nutritionists knew that this was killing Americans. They stayed quiet because of money. They stayed quiet because of money. When money, right? That's one case study. Two, we love to give Elon Musk all this credit for electric cars, right? We love to give Elon all this credit for electric cars. He didn't invent the electric cars. He wasn't sitting in his lab like Tony Stark's tinkering with shit. He's a financier. They keep calling him a technologist. He's a financier. He's learning on the job because his money allows him to learn on the job. He didn't code the operating system of the car. He's not sitting there in a wind tunnel figuring out the aerodynamics of that car. He's a financier, right? But the electric car was shelved, right? Watch this little clip.
The greatest tech fact of all time is in 1996, GM made a very good electric car and then did everything in their power to literally destroy it. It's the early 90s, Los Angeles is booming, but there's so many people and so many cars that the emissions were out of control. People started noticing that they couldn't breathe outside and thought, maybe we should look at some EVs. Right on cue, GM showed off a concept car called the Impact. It was sleek, it was modern, it could go 183 miles an hour. Even though they never sold the Impact, it built interest for their later EV, the EV1. Just like the Impact, the EV1 was sleek, modern, quick, it was selling like crazy. Besides the fact it wasn't actually selling. GM only lets you lease this car. Keep that in mind. The California Air Resources Board saw that the EV1 was doing well and told all the other car companies, you need to start selling some EVs. Ford made the Ranger EV. Toyota made the RAV4 EV. And even though the EV1's cult-like fanbase continued to grow, a weirdly organized group of EV haters also started to emerge. You can't tow anything with an electric car. Those charging stations are a waste of our taxpayer dollars. They're not even that good for the environment. Now you hear those same talking points today, but what was weird is the EV1 was popular, but not popular enough to warrant this much outcry. It was because the EV haters at the time weren't actually concerned customers. They were oil companies, car manufacturers, and politicians buying ads to sway public opinion away from EVs. There was so much hate for EVs that the car manufacturers went to the California regulators and said, hey guys, you can't force us to sell EVs anymore because nobody wants them. And the regulators said, fine, just make the cars based on demand. You don't have to sell a certain amount anymore. Now you would think GM would continue to make the EV1 because it still had a strong fan base, but they didn't. They started actively convincing people that were on the EV1 waitlist to not buy the car. And once they successfully convinced customers to not want to buy their car anymore, they told the government, yeah, nobody wants the EV1. And remember how everyone was on a lease agreement? Once that agreement was over, GM didn't let them renew it. They didn't let them buy the car outright. They instead took the car back, brought them to the desert, and crushed them. Why did GM do this? Well, somewhere along the ride, they discovered that EVs weren't a super profitable niche. Car companies make a crap ton of money on repairs. And if it's a good, reliable electric car, there really isn't any repairs to be made. That's the story of how GM killed their own car.
If you didn't see them do it, would you have believed me? Why would they shelve an electric car that was working? Even if it had problems, shouldn't we evolve? People were buying them. People were buying them. They sold out at one point. The economic future of the car, of the electric car, looked huge. They thought people would be scared, but people bought them. And then you know what they did? They made everybody turn them in. They recalled them. If you have one, kudos to you, you were smart. But most people took them in. Most people thought, oh, it's a bomb in my house. And the car was, they try to claim that the car was not viable, economically viable, or no one wanted it. Complete lies. Complete lies, because it was more important to capitalism and the petrodollar and fossil fuels to keep that spigot open that has been open since Henry Ford and Rockefeller agreed on it. Oil would power the world. No matter how filthy it was, no matter how dirty it was, no matter how bad for us it was, no matter what it was doing to the planet. Every study, every warning, none of that comes before money in a capitalist society. So even when you innovate, innovation is squelched. Innovation is buried, and it doesn't matter the American people's health, the American people's financial futures, lives. It's just like the sugar. Just douse them in unhealthy stuff. Never work on the problem that is caused by it. Never think about it, because we're all just watching the news and going, yeah. that we can't even see how capitalism is fueling most of the negativity, right? Don't think about capitalism in the macro way and socialism. Don't take out Marx. That's how they control your mind, is they make you picture these G.I. Joe characters. You always think you're fighting Cobra. You're not fighting Cobra. You're fighting common sense. You have all of these fourth industrial things coming, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in socialism, right? So the electric car is an example of capitalism running mad, right? The last one I want to focus on is the war on drugs. The war on drugs was supposedly a war on drug dealers and street gangs, but the war on drugs was a capitalist endeavor. That's right. They flooded African American communities with these drugs that could only, like, when people say that just some guy learned how to whip crack in San Francisco, it's a lie. It's a lie. And we accepted, yeah, just one guy one day took the cocaine, decided he was going to put a little baking soda because he understood that would pull the pure cocaine, and if you waited, it would go into rock form, and then you would smoke it with a pipe. You mean to tell me just someone chilling in the hood just created that? I don't want to doubt my people's chemistry abilities, because I've seen a lot of people rock up crack, and every time I've ever seen it happen, I've been amazed. Like, I've never touched crack. I've never smoked crack, been on crack like that. I used to walk to school and see crack vials in the floor, because after school, late at night, my school used to be the place where crackheads would smoke by the handball courts. I watched whole communities be destroyed, right, by a thing that is not even real to me in some ways. And the older I got, and the more crack became pervasive in communities. I lived in Brooklyn growing up. I also lived in Queens, and then I lived in LA. And all three of them had the same crack problem. And they want to tell you that that's the problem with capitalism, right? It's not the war on drugs. It's the ancillary things that come from it. Law enforcement, legal. Do you know how many people, the fortunes that have been lost in legal fees fighting a corrupt drug war, right? Human capital and the prison industrial complex. Now, my Africans, you need to learn this, especially in developing societies and Africans, and how we're going to treat human beings. Are we going to follow this old model, or are we going to become wise from it, right? So the war on drugs created all of these pipelines, or what I would like to call, how should I do this? Revenue streams. They're not doing evil. They have all of these revenue streams. And what did the war on drugs do? So the war on drugs was declared by Ronald Reagan. At the same time, his CIA was dumping cocaine. People try to say it was California. If they were doing it in California, they were doing it in New York. Again, there's no one in the hood that has boats. There's no one in the hood that has planes and ports, and whether it be airports or seaports, it doesn't matter. We know who has these things, right? But so now you've got millions of cops in the street. And when I was growing up, it wasn't just SWAT. What were they called again? I don't remember. But they created law enforcement task force that just decimated our neighborhoods. Like TNT, that was their name. The TNT guys would literally just run in the buildings, throw your grandmother on the floor, look for the drugs, and then when grandma complains, the police came in, I had no drugs, they threw me on the floor, they would go. And this has happened to multiple of my friends, never happened to me, but it happened to multiple of my friends. Their Grammys had no recourse because they said your grandson is a drug dealer, whether true or not. And we had a mayor that some of the world knows now, Giuliani, and the police called it Giuliani time. So when it became a norm for whipping our ass, ask anyone who grew up in the 90s, they will tell you police brutality we didn't even realize that police brutality was a problem until people started having these things, right? These things let you take a picture and video and record, and now you have compiled all this evidence of brutality and murdering and framing, because absolute power corrupts. And that was all a part of capitalism. So the law enforcement now has unbelievable powers. The legal system, the lawyers are cashing in because one body after another body, and people believe, my lawyer is better than the legal aid. Not always, right? But still, that story was told. They even started creating media and TV shows to manufacture consent of this thing. The war on drugs is an example of capitalism, right? And how it functions. The people who hold the capital made the laws. So when you have crack, right, the weight of cocaine, like a few grams, 500 grams of cocaine is a misdemeanor. And below, 500 grams and below is a misdemeanor. 500 grams of crack is 10 years to life in prison. So the poor people who were buying and selling the crack filled the prisons. And because capitalism is so pervasive and so strong, we didn't even see the prison industrial complex sprout out of that. The prison industrial complex was so foul that even a neoliberal like it's one of the best things Barack Obama did. And it also was one of the most identifying moments that I needed to do something different. I didn't start talking about the Pan-African state yet, but the moment that Barack Obama made illegal corporatized prisons, for-profit prisons, and the first day that Trump became president, the very first day, he signed an executive order that made industrialized prisons for profit, legal again. You understand? Capitalism does this. That is the reality of capitalism. So when we're building the infrastructure of our society, right? We don't want to take the versions that necessarily work or don't work. We don't know if these work or not. We don't know. You know why? Because Venezuela was doing fine. Their people was thriving. I remember it. I was in Haiti, and it was all they could talk about on the radio. How Chavez was sending us oil, and for a short period of time, I remember Haitian gas was 75 cents a gallon. It was incredible. It was in rare places, but if you knew where to get that Citgo gas in Haiti, you could get it for 75 cents. And this was in the 2000s. This wasn't in the 90s. This was in the early 2000s. 75-cent gas. You know what that would have done for Haiti? You know how many wrongs that little gesture of sharing their cheap oil with us, or sharing their cheap gasoline with us, right? But this is what capitalism does. Capitalism doesn't let the free market of ideas and different economics see who's the best. It can't. It's a religion, right? It is a religion, and Trump is the Pope. And then it has all these bishops, the bankers, the oligarchs, and they can't let you find out that this is probably the worst system. It's the reason why capitalism is so honored is because feudalism was so bad. Feudalism made it where anything was better. So when capitalism was introduced, and you got a job and you got paid, and you were like, wow, okay. And then if you did well and you saved your money, you could do this. But Marx saw this coming. Everything that Marx predicted came true. Every bad igniter of the human soul, right? When you tell a human being that greed is good, and he synthesizes that idea in his mind, and that makes it where now you have a society of greedy people. You have a society that is hurt, and it can't allow for a socialist system to emerge. Even now, the greatest socialist system we've ever seen is what we're seeing in China, because they think, oh, China's not communist. Yes, it is. It is run by the Chinese Communist Party. They define their communism in a different way. They evolved it. And that's what I seek to do with the Pan-African state, is to evolve the portions of it that allow you to thrive. Commerce is not against, socialism is not against commerce. Socialism is not against creating something, building it, right? What the Pan-African state does is it takes all of these case studies and it understands them. Venezuela, you're not militarily powerful enough to decide what you do. So we're going to make you a failed state. None of these can work because of sanctions, right? What Russia's trying to do can't work because of sanctions. Have you noticed every time a socialist country starts to do well, they put sanctions on them. They coup d'etat their leaders. How do we know if socialism would have worked in Haiti when you kidnapped Aristide 2 times before he could even implement one policy? That's how you know capitalism doesn't work. It's because they're terrified to let the world see someone do it. And now China, who's appropriately far away and appropriately large to express and flex some offensive reality, which is, you don't want to go to war with us. We're too big. We're engineering fleets ready to go to war for us. So what does the United States do? It does bitch ass shit. Throws rocks and hides its hands. It sabotages, goes behind your back, tells your girl, you know, he's cheating, right? That is the character that comes out of capitalism. You ever watch Lord of the Rings? And they had the one guy, his name was Wormser, and he's just whispering in the king's ear. That's capitalism. That's what's happening. So when you start to try to look at these sanctions, the only case study that matters is China. It's China. China is our example of when you are people-centric, and those people will die for that society because it pulled them up. 300 million, that's the African number. 800 million people pull from poverty. Every African on the continent and the diaspora should be reading how they did it. How did they do it? And it's very complicated. It's a lot of moving parts, but the main thing is they invested in their people. Capitalism cannot do that. Capitalism is looking to eventually be just one winner, and it needs many losers to create that one winner. And again, I want to make sure you're clear on this. I love building businesses. I love building software. I love building apps. I'm going to start sharing them. It's my great love. It's what I like to do, is build businesses, structure them. Why do you think I was able to dedicate my year of my life to doing this? It's because I see the potential in Africa. Like, I look at it and I go, this is ridiculous. We should be the most powerful nation in the world, not because we're attacking and bombing people, but because we're growing the best people. And China invested in their people. They made universities. They sent them there for free. People didn't have to worry about healthcare. Like, you pay for healthcare, but it's so cheap that you don't care. They subsidize all of this. You could go to a great university. Do you know how many times I yell at an engineer, and I stop yelling at engineers. But I yell at an engineer and they go, you know what? I don't have to deal with this shit. I can go back to China. It's one of the most powerful things that I'm working for one of the largest companies there is. They asked me to get in there to get a disorganized group of engineers to operate in a way that they move forward together. And the Chinese engineers didn't give a fuck. I'm usually very studious, usually very, very professional, polite, and if you're a dickhead to them, it's like, hey, I could work here, I could live in China. At least I'd see my mom once a week. I'm out. You can sit there and tell them, oh, you're gonna get paid better here. I'm paying $4,000 for my apartment. In China, it would be equivalent to about 400 in much safer neighborhood. I'm out, Eve. Peace. And you know what? That is what I want for Africa. So what flaws can come out of socialism. It's violence. It is my one concern. Socialism historically needs violence to be implemented, which is why I say go the exact other way. Learn the lessons from China. Learn the lessons from even North Korea. The violent part, although potentially necessary, the violence part is the part that I think, the internal violence at least, not the violence against your enemies, but the violence generated by, trying to nationalize all the minerals, or trying to force a nation into Pan-Africanism. None of that will ever work. The Pan-African state has to have, and I've been talking about this a lot lately, a kernel, a core idea that drives it. And that core idea it cannot be, oh, whoever doesn't get down has to lay down. I don't think that's necessary. I think China, even though they have their history of killing a lot of their own people, I want Africa to avoid that. I want to march towards the Pan-African state because it's the smartest thing to do, because it's the wisest thing to do. I built this channel so that I could see these ideas in the minds of Africans who want to make a difference, right? I want to share with you the best case study for socialism. And it wasn't by a socialist. I want to tell you about the creation of Linux by a guy named Linus Torvald, who was not a socialist. He's a nerd like me, and in those days, in the early 90s, we were all kind of, we were trying to build the future. We were trying to build a future that makes sense, right? And so we had these think tanks, these groups. There was this group called Something for Free Software, right? And that group, they were trying to fight the corporate idea of everything that you put on your computer, someone has to be paid for it or paid a license fee. And when I was a code programmer back then, I thought, yeah, you want the big, powerful corporation who has all the money, Windows or Microsoft, you want them to be your server-side system. You want to be run on ASP or .NET, as it would eventually become called, the Microsoft product, right? And we're talking about server-side. We're not talking about computers, even though the computer that I'm on right now, this Mac, it's Linux at the bottom. It's Linux. Almost every Mac is a Linux machine, right? And the reason why that is possible, and the reason why every Android phone is a Linux machine, right, is because this guy, who was not a socialist and probably didn't recognize the movement wasn't heading towards socialism, but what he was able to do by sitting in his bedroom and coding up this operating system for your CPU, right? What an operating system language has to do is it has to affect your memory, your storage, your data. It has to be able to go in there and control these hardware functions on a computer, well, on a server, right? And so the personal story for me is when I did my first startup, out of inexperience and youth, I thought you have to use Windows, you have to use .NET. And I had a friend who's another black programmer. He had a Linux server in his house, and he was like, "You want to host one of your websites on here?" And I was like, "Wow!" I was still using my regular telephone line for a modem, right? I would host websites. I'd make little servers on my computers, on one of my computers, but not Linux. And I was like, "It's free though." You understand the poison in my mind? I'm like, how am I going to depend this super tech company that I'm building? I'm 19 years old at the time. How am I gonna say or express my engineering genius on a free product? And more companies went the capitalist way, but what Linux did was it made it where tinkerers like me, every time I wanted to launch a website, I had to buy a license. Every time I wanted to host some software that I wanted to display, some ideas, some innovation, I had to pay Microsoft another license. When my users got to 1,000, I had to pay another. When my users got to 10,000, I had to pay another license. So not only am I paying Microsoft every time I grow, everything I build, the more users I have, the more receipts I have to store, the more data I'm storing, the more I would have to give Windows, more I have to give Microsoft or .NET or .ASP or whatever it was called at the time. That would have crippled everything. The .com era could not happen without Linus Torvald making it where you can spin out an operating system that costs you nothing. You can have 1 million users on it and it costs you nothing. And you know what that little bit of socialism did? It created the .com boom. It saved, not only did it create the .com boom that eventually capitalism turned into the .com bust, it created what saved it after. All this experimental shit, you could not build it. And eventually it would take down, because a great modern example of using .NET as your server-side operating system is MySpace. People think MySpace died because it became corny. MySpace died because they couldn't change it. It was built on .NET. I remember seeing it and saying, well, they're using ASP. What are they doing? How do you grow? It became too expensive to host all those people because every time you added another 1 million users, you had to pay Microsoft more. Do you understand what I'm saying? But Linux is now the 30 million lines of code that exist in Linux now, right? It is 96.3%, right? 96.3% of all the top servers in the world use Linux, right? And of the top 25 websites, right, only 2 don't use Linux, right? 90% of all cloud infrastructure, right? This is key. Think about what the cloud does for you. None of that would exist. This massive explosion of technology and everything else does not happen without this piece of socialism. So when you're talking to business people about capitalism versus socialism, there's no choice. What are we talking about? Where are we getting to? We have this example. We have this case study that shows us what is possible when you invest in people, when you open up things, when you create an environment for creation. Linus Torvald wasn't political. He was a coder in his bedroom that was kind of following along with an idea, the free software hippie thing, right? A guy named Richard, the free software movement, I gotta give him his flowers. But it's an example. When we first started building the internet, and I was one of the developers that first started building the internet, that doesn't mean I was laying down the fiber. It means I was building little web applications. Back in those days, in the early 90s, you could talk to a guy like Richard Stallman, right? He'd answer your emails. So when he created the free software movement, it was just an idea that was necessary. He recognized if everyone has to buy, so a 16-year-old kid like me who's learning the code, who's building these apps, if I had to pay for every single step of the way, where's the innovation? What is inducing young people to learn all of this? To just be stuck with a $5,000 a month bill? That's what I was paying when I first launched my first .com, y'allstreet.com. When I first launched that, I was paying $5,000 a month. I only had 500 subscribers. I had 500 people. But to be able to host those people putting files, putting images. It was $5,000 a month. I couldn't do it. But if I had built it on Linux, I could have plugged that jammy into a generator or an APC and just rocked out. My life would have been different. I was 16. I was 16 when I first heard about the free software. And I thought it was crazy because I'm so inundated in the religion of capitalism, to the point where a solution would appear, A solution would appear. But what did this guy, Richard Stallman, say? He just was like, hey, I'm gonna create something called GNU, and you guys just build off of that. And so on and so forth. And it was the anti-Bill Gates thing, because Bill Gates wanted to charge you a subscription or a license or something every step of the way. Any little upgrade, anything, pay me. Fuck you, pay me. And we've somehow believed that is the best way for humankind to go forward. And I just can't see it. I just can't see it. If we had to say capitalism or socialism, I wouldn't say either is the exact right fit, right? What I would say is it has to be a mixed economy that chooses the best parts of economics and form your own, what I like to call Ubuntu economics. Economics that makes sense to the African. You understand, we've only been in this phase of our history for 100 years, 500 years. The things that we've been doing for thousands of years, the way that we value things, is epigenetic. I never believed that before. I believe it more now than ever. Talking to Africans, speaking to them. The more African case studies I do, the more I know that is correct. Capitalism, I gotta say no. But a socialist, a new brand of socialism that ensures healthcare, that ensures education, that removes 300 to 500 million people out of poverty. You do these things, you now have commerce can appear from that. And you can have something where a society and a state works hand in hand to improving the human condition. That's what the people in control of the material wealth must put as a priority. Improving the human condition of the African. That has been my submission. That is my thing. And please, I want to talk. I want questions to be asked. I want to have a conversation. Comment. I will speak back. I will talk back. This early part of the new year has been insane. Everybody's scared of their money. I'm thinking of shuttering my consultancy just because it's just keeping me too busy and I'm not working on any of my own stuff. And we have work to do. I'm trying to go to Africa 4 times this year in 2026. I'm trying to make 4 trips. I'll do more trips if Africans invite me. So that being said, here we are at this precipice. Let's make this happen. My name is Yves Darbouze, and this is the Pan-African Product.